It is another beautiful day. But how beautiful can a day be when we see all these disturbing images from all over the world, from Africa to the Middle East to Ukraine? See humans killing humans. You see, humans are a devil of a problem to humans. People wake up in the morning, the first thing they should be thankful, as Skelly of Ether Vibration sang. It's my master's will that I see the sunlight today. I give a little here, I give a little there, and I keep some for myself. Life is so unfair, yet it's good to share. It's good to help someone else. That's a beautiful song by Skelly. You know, when we see what's happening in the Gaza, on the Gaza Strip, you know, you cannot help but wonder what humans have become or what humans are. Is this what humans really are? I think the Most High should be wondering about this creature that He conceived and created in His own name, created in His image. What happened to that creature? It's an altered humans. You see, we see a world that is plagued by Machiavellian tendencies or proclivities, where the politicians don't care about human life. Humans are being killed with impunity. And the same people that polish up all these humans go to their various homes and go down on their knees and they're cuddling dogs and cats. You know, they're kissing dogs, they're sleeping in the same beds with dogs, sharing their beds with dogs, sharing even the plates on which they eat with their dogs. You see somebody eats and he puts the plate down and the dog is licking on the plate. See, that tells you the amount of love that humans have for animals, for their pets. I will not say for animals, for their pets. You see? But the strangers to these people are not seen as humans. You see videos, you see images of Palestinian men recently who were stripped off, blindfolded, and um, humiliated by Israeli soldiers. You know, soldiers are lined up, and you see some tanks. You know, on some street, some abandoned, some derelict street, devastated street, and you see people kneeling down, and you see their shoes everywhere. You know, the sandals and shoes is scattered all over the place. I mean, you begin to wonder, but what did these people do? What happened to these people? Were these people fighters? You know, were they fighting against the soldiers, or were they just arbitrarily arrested on the streets and subjected to this humiliation? You know, war is an act of depraved inhumanity, even if it's waged on the basis of pure intentions. You dig? This is the argument that I make in my book Garrison Metropolis about war. See, war is vicious, you know, but war is not entirely void of virtue, of some type of virtue, because you cannot speak of virtue in terms of evil, because in essence, virtue is about goodness, it's about morality, it's about moral goodness. But then if you wage a war, it always is about an act of depraved inhumanity, even if it's waged on the basis of pure intentions. I'm speaking of the conduct of war. There's always tendencies that people get into excesses, you know. Machiavellian tendencies are very prevalent in war situations. Retribution, you have retributive massacres, you know. You have punitive extermination of humans, punitive extermination of little babies in the Gaza, as we all witness. You see, you could be rational in your decision to go to war. You see, you could be rational in your decision to go to war, but then you could be reckless in the actual pursuit of the war. See what I'm saying? You could be rational in your decision to go to war, but then you could be irrational and reckless in the actual pursuit of the war. So, being rational in recklessness is about expressing a whole range of frantic emotions. Yeah, you see, soldiers sit down and think about how they're going to, intervene, you know, to stop what they might perceive as, some enemy. mm? They want to go and kill the enemy, but there are rules of war, you see, which are transgressed when the soldiers, you see, the soldiers fail to respect this issue of non-combatant immunity. You're going to attack everybody on the street because you're angry against a certain community or angry against certain type of people whom you consider as your enemy or enemies in plural. So those are the things. Now, could it be the case that the Israeli soldiers and the political elites of Israel have chosen or have opted to continue with the devastation, to continue with the punitive extermination of the people who are not necessarily involved in this war in the Gaza Strip? I mean, I'm speaking of the whole of the Palestinian nation, so to speak, not only what happens in the Gaza Strip, even what happens up there in the West Bank and even in the Sinai. You're telling people to move away. You're trying to relocate people, forcefully relocate them. You're removing them forcibly. Because you want to continue with this bombing expedition, if I could call it that way. And when these people move, the bombings never stop. You continue to chase these people down, to punish them. So you have to ask. I keep on asking, in whose interest is it to prove that the Israeli Iron Dome is not the pick of the bunch? Was it just a ploy to justify this punitive extermination of the Palestinian people? And to say that, well, these people could attack us, despite the fact that we're protected by this Iron Dome. So we have to go and attack them and kill them, and remove them from this land. So what becomes of Israel? Now, the problem is these things are going on, and people seem to take it to be a normal issue, because we are living in this altered universe. People think that the Israelis can just go in there and exterminate all these Palestinian people and forcefully remove them from this land, and then everything is going to be okay. Then peace is going to return. The process of building peace, as we all know, takes time. And it's not something that is just happening by chance. There has to be justice there. You see, there has to be justice. And if you don't understand the meaning or the relevance of justice, you know, in the rehabilitation of societies, you'll never be able to have peace. You'll never be able to build peace. You'll never be able to construct a lasting peace. You'll never even be able to conceptualize lasting peace, you know? So those are the things that are happening there. It has become normalized. You see, now this exercise in Israel, you know, in the minds of the Israeli politicians who are becoming more and more Machiavellian in the actual pursuit of the war. Well, the fact that the Hamas went in and killed so many people, between 1,200 and 1,400 Israelis, and took about over 200 people hostages. I think they've released them now. Ever since I made the video about this, they have released some captives, but they're still withholding some. You know, um, now the problem is this thing is not ending. It's still continuing because people are talking all over about a ceasefire, but the ceasefire is not taking place. They're talking about, you know, a two-state solution. This is what the Americans are preaching. The Americans, which have incidentally turned down or keeps on turning down the UN resolution on ceasefire, you know, and at the UN Security Council just a couple of days ago. So the US people are saying that the US has been isolated because I think the vote was, I think, 13 people in favor, 13 nations in favor, or 13 member states, 13 member states in favor of the ceasefire resolution at the UN Security Council. The US was the only nation that voted against it. And then there was, I think, one nation that abstained. You know, Britain abstained. So you can imagine the amount of disillusionment in these institutions. You see, in institutional terms, we will speak of institutional exhaustion. What is the relevance of the UN? What is the relevance of the UN Security Council? What is the relevance of the EU? You know, institutions which are ineffective, institutions which cannot solve the most basic problems that are plaguing humanity. The UN Security Council is powerless in the face of the conflict in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The UN Security Council is powerless in solving the question in Ukraine between the Russian Federation and NATO and the EU. You see? So when institutions are getting ineffective, as we are witnessing, you know, we are more and more being invited to conceptualize new ways of interaction, new ways of thinking, new ways of conceptualizing this world. If you're telling us that you want to build you want a two-state solution, that's what the Americans are saying. They're preaching this, and they're actually doing something else. They're preaching a two-state solution to the problem between the Israelis and the Palestinians. At the same time, they're encouraging the punitive extermination of the Palestinian people. So there is a disconnect between these two things. If you're telling the world about the two-state solution, the question I want to ask is this, or the questions I want to ask are these ones. Where are these two states going to be located in a geographic sense? How would you conceptualize this state or these two states solution, in an institutional sense? You see? And then how would you make these two people live, these two nations, the Israelis and the Palestinians, how would you make them live in this two-state solution in a sociological sense? See, so those are the things, because we are dealing with a politically embattled universe around there, And by the way, Israel itself is a country without a close-knit fraternity. It's a militarized country without a tightly knit community, because you see, you have so many Jewish people, not only those that live in Israel, or what has become known as Israel, that was established in 1948. You have so many Jewish people coming up and denouncing, the conduct. I'm not talking of the reason of the war, use ad bellum, not that. I'm talking about the conduct of the war, use in bello. It's a Latin words, There are many Jewish people. You have Max Blumenthal. You have, you have Norman Finkelstein. You have Levy, the journalist there. You see, you have even Ehud Barak, who used to be, I think, one time Israeli prime minister. You have so many of these people criticizing what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing against the Palestinian people, because they acknowledge this. The Israelis openly acknowledge the issue of settler colonialism. That's exactly what they're doing to the Palestinian people. You're taking their land. You see? So this only bespeaks the notion that, or the idea, or the suggestion that I keep on making, that the final problem, the final solution to this problem is going to be about irredentism, that is, returning this land in some way or in some capacity to the people who are supposed to be the original owners of the land. Now, the question is, who are the original owners of the land? Now, how far back are we going to be ready to take ourselves to when we are out to to decide on ways to address this problem? So those are the things. So when we see all these pictures, these very disturbing pictures of Israeli soldiers, manhandling Palestinians, whom we are not told if they were combatants, and if these people were not combatants, and you're not able to establish that these people were not fighting against you, so what you're actually doing to these people is a crime, you know. But we have seen so many crimes being committed in this particular war, you know. I begin to wonder sometimes if some of these things were happening in some African states, what would the Europeans say? They would talk of the African people, that this, look at what those savages are doing. Say, look at those savages, look at what they're doing. Look at what the soldiers of this country, look at what they're doing to their own people. They'll say, oh, that leader is killing his own people, you know. So those are the types of things we are talking about in this world. You see, this double speak, this you see, this conspiratorial form of integration which only generates immoral dependencies. The Americans depending, or the Europeans depending on the Americans, you know, to the extent that whatever the Americans support, the Europeans would just give a blind eye to it. They give a blind eye while watching the Americans cheerleading the Palestinians to their ultimate demise. The Israelis might not understand now, but this problem will not end. They're only inviting upon themselves a very, very horrible form of hatred. So even those who sympathize initially with the Israelis will start to develop some type of disgust for them. See, countries like Germany, the Germans, as I keep on saying, are caught in a real quandary. They're caught in a fascinating moral dilemma. But they probably have a justification for that. You see, the Germans are not speaking. European nations are coming out. The Spaniards have denounced this. They're even talking about sanctioning Israel. You see, you have the Irish. You see, they've denounced Israel. I'm speaking of the conduct of the war in the Gaza Strip. You have the Australians, you have the Canadians. They're all denouncing this. You see, so they're actually coming out now and speaking out because when you don't say something, when you're observing or witnessing something wrong, and you know that there are rules that tell you that these things are wrong to do, and you don't say anything. So what you're actually doing is that you're acquiescing to what you're observing, and you refuse to say anything because you claim to be an ally. But in effect, you're not an ally. You're just a chattel. So these are American chattels of Europe, as I call them. You know, you know that this is wrong, but you don't say anything. You were the same people that were very critical. You're openly critical of the Russians when they intervened in Ukraine. The Russians themselves say, or they keep on saying, that they intervened in Ukraine to protect the people of Eastern Ukraine that were being massacred by the Ukrainian government headed by Volodymyr Zelensky. But when the Russian president Vladimir Putin removed these children from the war zone in Ukraine and took these children to Russia for safety, he was accused. You see, of he was accused of kidnapping the children, that is, forcibly removing the children from the war zone, and that was seen as a war crime. So, if that was a war crime, what would the Europeans themselves say when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu's conduct of the war in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank? So, these are the kinds of things that people see and they close their eyes. You think? It's a world of materialistic perversity and self-interested dead weight. You see crime against humans. You see crimes against humans even when you know about this notion of or this principle of non-combatant immunity. What has become of that principle? You see crimes against humans, crimes against little babies, crimes against an army of blameless little babies, but you decide to stay quiet. You're watching, you're observing, and even though your conscience has been jolted, but you stay silent. What has become of you? Where is your honor? Where is your morality? You know, you become the most moral judge. You become the Samaritan. You see, when it has to do with when it has to do with things that concern your interest, you're the moral judge. But when it comes to things that are in opposition to what is in your interest, you see, you stay silent, even if you know that it is against your conscience. Your conscience has been jolted because you see the carnage, but you don't see anything. No, because you're siding with somebody whom you claim is in alliance with you, but you don't want to acknowledge the fact that you are just a chattel, because there is some honor in being an ally, because you can be a client state, you can be a vassal state. Those are all things that have a certain amount of honor. But when you're a chattel, you've been objectified, you've been diminished, you see, to an object. That's why you cannot speak for yourself. You're scared to speak. You're scared to speak out. You're scared to tell the world what you feel. You're scared to take a position. You're scared to stand up for yourself. You're scared to take a stand and say, no, this is for justice. Because the conflict in the Gaza promises to be very devastating if nothing is done. If the world continues to watch the Palestinians being humiliated as such, it's going to build more and more. It's going to invite more and more sympathy upon them. And it's going to invite more and more disrepute upon the Israelis, regardless of the fact that they're supported by the United States, which is supposed to be the champion of freedom and equality, you see, which is supposed to be the champion of liberty, of morality. But you're supporting the punitive extermination of little babies. That is quite sad. We hope that people look at this issue with pure hearts and clean minds. Yeah, because what is starting in the Middle East is going to move. It's over. It's almost, what is it? How many days is it now? It's like since the 7th of October, when Hamas invaded Israel or went into Israeli territory, or what is known as Israeli territory today, and mowed down all those people. And then the Israelis have been fighting. So they've been fighting for almost 70 days now. But the Hamas are still fighting. So there is this chance that this problem is going to escalate into a full-blown regional conflagration. It's just a question of time. It's just a question of time before this thing explodes or gets out of hand, or spirals out of control. You dig? We have politicians in Europe without a conscience. They sit down in the EU Commission, and undermine the voices of the European masses, who elect their members. They elect the parliamentarians to go to the European Parliament to speak for them. But when these parliamentary members of the EU Parliament speak, their voices get overridden. by the bureaucrats of the EU, you know, that are hiding in the European, Council of Ministers. Those are the things that happen, and no one is talking about these things. But we keep on watching all these atrocities, all this devastation, you know, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in African countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Cameroon, Congo, everywhere we see this devastation. But when it comes to African countries, nobody's even talking because Africans don't even count. Africans don't matter to these people, you know. So as I've said, you can go to war on very rational basis. You can have your rational argumentation that permits you to go to war. But then in the actual pursuit of that war, you may become reckless. Hmm? So being rational in recklessness is about expressing a whole range of frantic emotions. You see, you become uncontrolled. You become emotional. And when you become emotional, you're not dispassionate anymore. You don't follow what you actually set out to achieve, you know? So those are the things in this act of depraved inhumanity, you know? You wage it with the purest of intentions, but at the end of the day, you fall into retribution. You fall into massacres, even though you began with a pure intention, to try to redress the balance. You see, redressing the balance has pushed you into the punitive extermination of little babies. You're killing innocent people. You're blindfolding people on the streets, people that are not even involved. These are non-combatants. You're arresting them on the streets and humiliating these people. The more you humiliate these people, is the more you're going to push them to the extreme. When you let them go, they'll go and want to react. This is how you build, a whole nation of violence. You know, you're making everybody violent, and when you make everybody violent, by giving them ample justification to be violent, over time, you're going to have to intervene to save the people from themselves. These are the things that people have to understand. See, so violence is a flagrant social problem in this adulterated universe. You see, it's a very serious issue that has to be considered, with due diligence, you know, with a dispassionate mind. We have to put aside all this emotionalism, when you have to address problems, that are plaguing humanity. A sociological problem like what we're witnessing in the Gaza Strip or in the Gaza, you know, the Palestinian nation, the war in eastern Ukraine, which I said a long time ago, will not be easy to defeat the Russians. You cannot even speak of defeating the Russians in eastern Ukraine. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I said that the Russians were going to trap NATO and the EU in Ukraine and make Ukraine or transform Ukraine into a blazing furnace because Ukraine is found, in the backyard of the Russian sphere of influence. So it's very easy, it's very basic to understand this logic. It's not something you have to think so much about. You see? Now we hope that this violence against civilians should stop. This hatred, this passionate hatred against people who have not done no wrong. Because I don't believe personally that every single Palestinian supports what Hamas did. I don't believe so. There are some Palestinians who do not really want that. But the more the Israelis continue to kill their people, you see, the greater the chances that they're going to be more Palestinians who are going to start celebrating when Israelis are killed. So the more the Israelis kill innocent Palestinian people, innocent Palestinian babies, the more the chances that the Palestinians are going to be happy when Israelis get killed. So this spiral of violence has to stop at some point. You know, Schadenfreude has no place in the world. We have to find ways to address this problem before it becomes, you know, it becomes a very serious existential problem. Yeah, because even the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers that are outside on the streets arresting these Palestinians and blindfolding them and humiliating them, even the soldiers do not really know why they do that. They will tell you that they are doing that on the orders of someone. It goes back to Benjamin Netanyahu. So he's the one giving the orders to the soldiers to do this to these non-combatants who are supposed to have immunity, in the incidents of war. But if you cannot establish that these people are actually fighters, then you're not supposed to treat them as such. And that is where the problem is. So people are coming now and saying that, oh yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu can indeed be arrested. And if Benjamin Netanyahu is arrested, he would say that, he was acting on the orders of the US, of Germany, of Britain, and all those countries which are supporting him, which are siding with him. He could say that. That's a very logical argument that he can make. You see that? So those are the kinds of things we have to deal with. So we have to find a way to address this problem before it becomes an existential peril to mankind as a whole. It's a beautiful day, but it's a day full of pain, a day full of agony and tears as we watch little babies getting polished off with impunity. We have to find a way to stop these things. Share with your friends, share with your family, share with everyone this beautiful message of redemption, this beautiful message of comprehensive remediation. All right, I'll leave it at that.